Brandon, it has been like 3.5 weeks, but we're back
We're
after
finally
a
back.
while.
Yeah.
Good to be together. Things were a little crazy. I know our last episode was even, a truncated episode because we were talking about faith and parenting, and then I had to go do some parenting. It was crazy, schedule in the families and people that had been not feeling so great and all of this. And then everybody in my family was feeling great, and we were on vacation. And then I come back, and Lee and I are sick, and all said and done, it's been like, I think 3 weeks off. In here, I joked, I said we could call it season 2. By the time we got back, it's like we had to take a mid-season break here.
Oh, here we are, season 2. I'm excited about kicking it back up. I've missed asking questions. I've missed sitting in the curiosity. I've missed getting comfortable with the discomfort. So I'm so glad we're back.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Brandon's just laying it out for you, but this is all questions considered, and that's the idea, is to consider all sorts of questions. Usually we have kind of a theme topic, but also we want to hear from you what your questions are and just kind of lift them up. And the goal is not so much to answer a question, but to sit in the discomfort of not having an easy answer, to learn to kind of build our muscles and practice the skill of not knowing or not having a clear and easy answer, but just kind of loving the questions and leaning into our curiosity. And today we are gathered, and it just happened, Tuesdays, it happens that this one is election day. So we figured we may as well talk a bit about, elections and voting, and consider your questions for that. So whether you got questions about elections and voting and faith, or if you've got other questions, share them in the comments. Let us know what you're thinking. If you have questions that aren't about this, go ahead and ask them, whether we get to them today or not. They'll help us plan future episodes. And then we would love for you to go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/allquestionsconsidered. And the pinned post there will lead you to a Google form where you can ask whatever question you want. And if you want to ask a question anonymously, you can. But we love engaging your questions too, not just the ones that Brandon and I come up with or do some research and find from other places. We want to know what questions are coming up for you.
Yeah, I was walking this morning with my dog and my son, and saw a line out the school door that's by us. And I was like, today's election day. Got to. So I was excited to ask you questions, Drew, because this afternoon is when my wife and I will be walking over there to vote. And so so my first question for you is, who should I be voting for? As a Christian, who should I be voting for? But seriously, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Is how do I vote faithfully as a Christian? How should that shape how I think about who do I vote for, but even the act of voting itself. How does the Christian tradition, does the Christian faith have something to say of what does it even mean to vote? How should I think about voting? Is voting of value as somebody who's a Christian? So that's going to be my first question for us to consider. Is
Yeah.
How
well,
should we
that's a good one. You took. Yeah, you took my first question, which was going to be, have you voted? But you already answered. No, yeah. I've got my sticker on that I made it. So, which might already give you a hint to where might reveal some of my leanings on, how we vote, or how we might consider what it is to vote, or why we might vote. So let's. I can think about it a few different ways, and I think that Christians probably think about this several different ways. There's some subset of Christians who probably would say, choose, this is kind of the historic monastic tradition, like the monks, right? To kind of just remove themselves from society and say, you know what, society's got to do its own thing, and it's too hard to live a Christian life among you, so we're going to go kind of form our own community.
Yeah.
And this is the early Christian monks do this sort of in protest to Christianity becomes the empire becomes the religion of the empire. they sort of protest. They're like, no, you're not going to be able to do it. You're going to mix it up and get it lost. So let's get out of here. Just kind of go away and we'll do our own thing. Some of them alone, mostly creating communities. So I think there's one where you still see that response from Christians across the world of let's just try and create our own community with its own sort of set of rule of living and not really care about or participate in, right? So that'd be one reason that somebody might faith and say, you know what, I'm just going to try and create this own thing over here and not really worry about voting or engaging in society pretty much at all any more than I have to. I think that others might say, how there's part of scripture or their general beliefs of kind of God as all powerful and as having kind of providence and having a plan and having things set out. So somebody might question there, and not just with voting, but with actions in general, like how much can actually do or influence. Therefore, is it really important? If God's already determined who the victor of this election will be, why does it matter or not? I think that there's a way that somebody might sort of understand bits and pieces of the faith. I would say generally, people of faith and Christians would say it's important to vote, and we should vote. And kind of there's this two other examples. But I would say the majority of Christians would say it's important to vote, and I think that they would, or a lot of traditions, I can kind of see maybe two different ways. And there might be policies that align with values, with particular values, and this is where things get a little murky. We talked about kind of faith and flag and things where kind of like a religious right or a majority kind of language and things. I think at least started with like, here are some political issues that as people of faith we want people to represent a certain way. So it's important to vote because of that, because of sort of a morality and ethics lens. And these people have policies that are going to do that. I think that there's even a wider lens, and this is where my tradition tends to be considering, I guess, two frameworks, right? One is love of, so how we live together will impact on you and me and has real impact on my neighbor. So I have to consider everything I do, including the fact that I can vote, to as a means of loving my neighbor. So this might poke some holes in us who would rather vote for people who are going to support what we want. This kind of flips it and says, hey, well, as Christians, we elevate the needs of our neighbor and the value of loving our neighbor. So I ought to vote for what's in the best interest of my neighbor. I ought to consider the act of voting as means by which, now, the only, if you don't vote, you might consider and voting is an issue of stewardship. Like, we're given things and we can use them in certain ways. We're given charge over or certain privileges or gifts. I don't know. A little bit of connection issues.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It might be a little bit delayed, a little bit laggy. But you're mostly coming through right now. Awesome. Yeah, I'm getting comments in the chat saying it's a bit choppy. Working on that. Um, hopefully, Drew, I can get you back here so that I can know who do I vote for, Drew. If I lose you, I'm not going to know how to go to the polls. I'm only partially joking.
Hey. Oh, uh-oh. Now I don't have sound though.
I can hear you on my end now.
Okay. Technical here for us. Hopefully we made. I know I lost everybody before I was talking, or when I was trying to talk stewardship of the vote. But just like voting as a way that you can steward or right, like that you're given rights and privileges as a citizen of a nation, and so you can do something with those. And how, so having the work of, well, I've been given the opportunity, gift, right, privilege to do this thing. I ought to use it well. But there are, all of that to say, there are many reasons then that people, that Christians or people of faith in general might say, I'm not going to vote, or I am going to vote, and whether or not exercise the right that we are afforded as citizens, we might find different reasons to do that or not to do that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the point you hit on of like determinism, and if our elections already preordained by God, do I have much say? And at the heart of that, there's kind of a question that all of us, in some ways, have to grapple with or decide how we're going to participate in. Is how much do I get to participate and shape what's going on here in the continual, ongoing creation of the world? How much does my neighbor get to shape it? How much is God shaping it? There's kind of this, who has real agency here? Do I get to shape and play a part in this? And voting is a very, a very clear time where those questions come to the surface. How much say do I have here? How much say does my neighbor have? Is God at play as an agent in here? And so it's an interesting time at voting times when we're kind of directly exercising or maybe choosing to forego that that right to vote and how we're participating. So I love that that's kind of an issue going on here. Is what is my role in the ongoing creation of the world? I also loved the idea of voting as an act of love for your neighbor. That's an amazing lens to look at voting through. Instead of it being as, what do I want my taxes to be next year? What do I want? Thinking about it for myself as an isolated individual and maybe the list of things I do or don't want to happen, but rather I've heard somebody talk about politics at its core is kind of how do we arrange humans in the world? How do we organize and arrange humans in the world? And that drastically affects everything. So seeing it as how do I want to arrange, organize, and shape the life of my neighbor? And can I, would that change my vote at all if I thought, how do I vote for my neighbor? Which reminds me of a Peter Rollins, everybody take a drink, parable as where he talks about an angel comes to somebody and says, this is a good day for you because I'm going to grant any wish that you want. And the person gets really excited. And the angel says, in fact, this is a very good day for you because whatever you ask, I'm going to give it twice to your neighbor. And so the person pauses and says, you know what? Take one of my eyes. And this idea that if our neighbor's going to get whatever we get and even more, then maybe we would actually have harm to us, so that even more harm would come to our neighbor. Would it change my vote if I thought about it only in terms of what's going to be best for my neighbor? I love that lens and thinking about voting in those terms. So, but you also mentioned policies and values that, well, one, maybe we start at a bigger level of, is there a party that's a Christian party or a more Christian party? As a Christian, should I walk into the voting booth and just vote straight ticket for one party because one of them is more edified, saved, whatever, is more aligned with the divine than the other side? So let's start at just like a party standpoint. Is there a party that aligns more with
Yeah.
the Christian faith?
I mean, so I can say one, so the media and certain Christians and Christian leaders would absolutely tell you yes. And there are people that would say yes about both of the major parties and maybe even like some of the third parties or whatever. They would be like 100%. This is God's intent. This is God's plea. With at least as much exuberance these days as they would tell you that the Cowboys are God's football team, right? Like, and I think that it seems to me that those are bad answers. I kind of try to reserve a little bit of judgment, but I would say there is not now, has there ever been in the United States, a party that 100% represents the values of God and God's justice and righteousness. Government, although sometimes God, I think, through government or elected officials and leaders, and although we certainly ought to like pray for our elected official leaders, that they would make wise choices and choices that align with God's grand intent of fullness for this creation. I think that to say or to mix up that any political leader or party is sort of God's party or God people of faith to take and there's not this where I stand like party that 100% is the world in the way that God seems to organize the world.
So if we can't just walk in and say, well, I'm a Christian, therefore I vote for this party, then what should be the things that drive our thinking, our decision making, our wisdom as far as who we should vote for or what maybe we're voting for? Maybe we're not voting for a person or a party as much for something else. So what should be the things that are on our minds and steering the things that we vote for?
Yeah, one question. I'm trying to close the computer
Yeah, it's breaking up
Um,
quite a bit right now for me.
so if it's not okay, a single party that makes this happen, um, or even a perfect candidate to fix it all, which some candidates would claim, or some people would say, oh, maybe this is the one. Um, then what do we take in with us? I would encourage folks, and certainly as a pastor, this is the only thing that I ever speak to. Churches are not partisan entities, but they can speak to policies. Uh, and my framework is one of love for neighbor. Uh, and that to me, right? Like I would say I could take the 10 commandments, but I could also just take kind of Jesus' greatest commandment. Does this leave space for us to fully love God and love neighbor? Um, and that's my general litmus test for policies. I do think that leaves some room for Christians to come to different answers, or looking at a full slate of policies of opposing candidates. Um, Different people might elevate different of those policies as more important, because again, there's not one platform that's I've never seen a platform that perfectly represents my values and preferred policies as a faith. So I'm always still having to sort of weigh things. And so in some ways it's like, well, do I think that then I'm going to be able to um, advocate for better treatment of my neighbors under a certain administration more easily or effectively than
Mm.
another one? Is going to listen more? Like, it might get down to that, but I would start with policies, and I would encourage at least people of the Christian faith to have that litmus test. At least start with, is this love my is this in the best interest of my neighbor? To do like purges the church in Philippines, to consider others' needs as greater than your own, and to humble yourselves, which is not to neglect your own needs and care, but it is to consider your neighbors, like that, like in that parable, right? And often we're playing that comparison sort of blame game, and we get wrapped up in that. This goes back to our episode on sin. We turn in on ourselves, and we go into the voting booth only. I mean, and you do, right, for good reason, to protect people from voter fraud and things like. You're the only one going into the voting booth when you vote, except for I have my kids with me, and my son did try and tap the screen one time when I told him not to. But generally, you're um, you're in there and you're voting, and nobody's voting for you. You're doing those voting, but this is that framework of, and for me, that's not even uh, exclusive to voting. It's just hopefully a posture that I take on in life of favor as myself. How do I and sort of consider them as
I think I lost you again, Drew.
I know.
Let me know if you can hear me. I think one of us is frozen. I might be the frozen one. You might be the frozen one. I'm not sure. There we go. Maybe.
All right. I'm switching over to a lower quality band. We've got construction going on at the church, and I think there might be getting in the way of our internet because we're working. So we'll do our best. I apologize for all the technical difficulties, everyone.
No.
What did you get? Just love our neighbor. That's the. I mean, that's the like. Is there an answer in week's episode? I would invite you to consider how you're loving your neighbor with everything you do, including your vote.
I love it. And even with that, of course, there's interpretation because how do I love that you asked, like, how do these policies, would they create space, allow me to love my neighbor in the best way? Would they directly be loving of my neighbor? And of course, there's a whole lot of space there for interpreting. What could that do? Should we have higher taxes so that it's able to be distributed more among us, or should it be lower taxes? That way I can use my money to then love my neighbor directly the way that I see is best. There's all kinds of interpretations and ways that we could look at how this says, but it would be really interesting. And I might even do that after this episode, is pull up some of the main candidates, that we're thinking about. And even for our district here, I think, I can't remember, our district 13. But looking at the kind of list of policies for each of the candidates and say, which one of these would love our neighbors better? So I love that as, if there is an answer here, through the choppiness, through whatever, how your vote is one of the ways that we have real power to shape how we love our neighbor here in our democracy. So I love that, Drew. And that comes through loud and clear, choppy and all. So I think that's great.
Well, yeah, and then here. I've got one set of quote from I think wise advice from a pastor who founded the Methodist Church, John Wesley, had a little bit of something to say about how we vote, and it's not as we've been, it's in line with what we've been talking about. It's not who you vote for, but it's what's a good mindset as a person of faith to take into the polls here. And so way back in 1774, he said, with those who had votes in the upcoming election, and I advised them, vote without fear reward. So don't be bribed for your vote. That was, vote without fear reward for the person you judged most worthy. Number 2, speak no evil of the person you vote against. And number 3, take care that your spirits are not sharpened against those who voted on the other side.
I like that. Your spirits aren't sharpened against
voting advice.
Yeah, that's really good. Because, I mean, if we are going into the polls with the criteria of how can my vote best help love my neighbor, then we should also be able to walk out of the poll, out of the voting booth, with the spirit of let me love my neighbor regardless of how they voted. So we can't walk into the voting booth with love directing our actions, and then walk out of the vote with our spirit sharpened towards the people who voted differently than us. That's great.
Yeah, it's the same kind of mentality of kind of consistency. The same way we shouldn't, walk into church and commit a way of life, then we leave the worship service and don't live in accordance with, right? And that's kind of that same idea, right? You're gonna and you shouldn't speak ill of the candidates you voted against, just because you're voting for somebody. It shouldn't mean you're, speaking evil, I think is what he says, against the others. I think that we would do well to listen to Pastor Wesley in that regard these days. And then, and then the other side, right? And for people who voted differently than you, the same thing applies. You're supposed to love them too.
I wish whoever, the different organizations that do the commercials during the campaigns. I wish that they would take his advice because they're always just the most like, I just feel gross during the season. Anytime I'm like watching a football game and then, they cut to break and it's like, the one that was bothering me recently was one that was like, if you Google the word corruption, don't be surprised if this candidate pops up. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And so I think we would all do well to heed Mr. Wesley's advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe the question that I would pose in response to all these attack ads, or the way that our political system works, or the ways that we engender evil thoughts towards the people that we're voting against, or that we're not voting for. The question that comes to my mind is like, what does that say about who we are and what we listen to most and what gets people's attention? Because my guess is these politicians and their campaigns have done a lot of research into why it's useful to place attack ads, to not just play your campaign, so to speak poorly again, not heed advice, and the questions that come to mind. What does that say about us, right? And about our society, or about this moment in this kind of season? And then in terms of how we process, or what voices we listen to most. And then the flip side, or I guess the next question that would come, is what would it take to make this change toward not speaking evil about those who vote differently, or about candidates that you're not supportive of. And then the third one too is that I think is kind of that motivating thing. How would we act differently? Change what would be different if we swapped this around, if we focused on policies and loving our neighbor, and got rid of attacking others, speaking ill, or creating negative thoughts about candidates and the people who vote for those candidates.
Yes. I love those questions. What does this say about us? What does this say about me? That this is what gets my attention, that this is what maybe most stokes my spirit. And then what would it look like to turn that around and to be driven by something else? And what comes to my mind is, what would the practices for myself be that I would need to participate in order for for me to be directed by things that aren't anger and outrage and shock? What would it take for me to be more led by other things, like love and peace and joy? So I think those are wonderful questions, and things that politics really bring to the forefront is what gets our attention as a society, what really stirs us towards action, and often there was a book I was reading about modern politics that was talking about, in today's day and age, we're mostly driven by hating the other team, more than we are driven by what we're for. So we're more driven by what we're against. We're more driven by kind of a tribal or a team mentality, rather than what can we actually do with our vote, with our policies, then rather than like, how can we not lose, or how can we be more against, and driven by hate often. So how can we be people that are driven by love? And I think that's the defining thing that we're talking about here. So I love that. How can we use our vote to love our neighbor?
Yeah, maybe one final nugget of wisdom. I'll lean on scripture a little bit, and just a sense of, when I see a lot of political ads or things, or what I see motivating a lot of people to vote, or to vote for or against certain candidates, is I see the wielding of fear, right? If you vote for this person, this terrible scenario is going to happen. If you don't vote, this is this awful, horrible thing. And I don't want to negate that, like, people in positions of power have the power to make life miserable from, and there's politics. I think the other underlying of this is, like, we do well when we remember that politics, it affects people on a personal level too, right? That stunts of flying people to lying to people and to get them somewhere else to try and make a political win for yourself really detrimentally impacts, right, like that, like immigration policy and reform, these big things, like these are real people who are beloved bearers of God's image. Like all of this is we do well when we remember that it really actually does affect our neighbor in these ways, and that other people in our country are our neighbor, even regardless of citizenship status. They're still our neighbor. And and so having that kind of sense, and then so then I wonder, right, how then might perfect love drive out fear? How might we motivate? But again, what does it say? Well, maybe there's some theological response to what it says about us, that we get so in ourselves that we get motivated by fear more than other things, or at least that people think we do. And so how do we reset that, and how do we remember that the response to fear sometimes is bravery or courage, but always is love.
I love it, Drew. That feels like a great place to end. And maybe we'll even end 15 minutes early. So if you need to run to the polls right now, you can. Because I'm guessing this is many people's lunch break.
Right.
I think it's a thing that don't businesses have to give you at least so long today to go vote if you want to. So hopefully people
I am
on their way to the polls.
Yeah, I'm a little underinformed, and I know laws are different places, and depending on what your like type of employment is. You, Brandon, you're an independent contractor, right? Like nobody's creating space in your schedule for you to be able to go do it. And that is one of the interesting things. Or that's this was my kids, my observant children on the way to school. We voted early. I didn't actually vote today. I just put the sticker back on for our show today. But we did early voting, and our kids went with us. And but then this morning, our neighborhood center is a polling place, and there were tons of people lined up. And my 5-year-old daughter goes, "Why is everybody voting today when they should be taking their kids to school?" I was like, "Oh man, I guess my an opinion on the fact that we have election day as a school day and work day, whether it's fully formed or not." But like, man, people should be going to work and going to school today, but here they are at the polls. The flip side of the question is, I wonder why we pick a Tuesday that's a school day and a work.
That's a good question, Lily. It does. It does seem to make sense to why don't we do it on the weekend? I'm on the 5-year-old side here. I'm sure there's reasons behind it I don't understand, but on the surface level, I agree with your daughter. All right, Drew, might have lost you again, or lost me. Unless we get you back right here, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I'm just going to assume you're signing off on your end too. So thank you, everybody. If I'm still live, thank you all for watching. I hope you find some time today, if you haven't already, to go to the polls. I hope this has been a fun conversation about how do we think about what it means to vote? How do we participate in the ongoing creation of the world here through voting in our democracy? And what would it look like to use a criteria of loving our neighbor as what is driving who and how and what we are voting for? I'm seeing Drew a little bit come through. Maybe not, though. All right. Well, until next time, ask a good question.